I used to love night drives through the Blue Ridge. There was something calming about the curves, the empty stretches of highway, the way the mountains swallowed sound until it felt like you were drifting through a place older than anything you could understand. But ever since that night, I haven't taken a road through those ridges after sundown. I doubt I ever will again. It was a little after midnight, late enough that the traffic had thinned out completely and the radio stations dissolved into static. Fog had been gathering for miles, but around mile marker 212 it thickened in a way I'd never seen before. My high beams didn't help. They just reflected the white cloud back at me, blinding me worse. The road narrowed into a long curve along a cliffside, the kind where you know there's nothing but empty air on the other side of the guardrail. I slowed down, leaning forward like it would somehow sharpen my visibility. That's when I saw him. At first I thought it was just my eyes playing tricks on me. A dark shape by the guardrail, motionless, facing the mountains. But as my car crawled closer, the fog parted just enough for my headlights to outline a man. He stood perfectly straight, hands down at his sides, as if he'd been placed there. No car, no stalled vehicle, no flashlight, just a man alone at the edge of a cliff in the middle of the night. I slowed to a near stop, rolling down the window a few inches. "Hey," I called out. "You all right?" He didn't answer. He didn't even turn his head. I wasn't sure he'd heard me, so I tried again, louder this time. Still nothing. The closer my headlights got to his face, the heavier that feeling grew in my chest. This uneasy, prickling sense that something was off. Not wrong in a dramatic way. Just unnatural. His skin looked pale, but not sickly. More like someone who hadn't seen sunlight in a long time. His expression didn't shift. His eyes didn't blink. It was like he wasn't there to react. Like reacting wasn't part of what he did. I considered pulling over and checking on him, but a knot tightened in my stomach the longer I looked. Something in my instincts kept whispering, "Don't get out of the car. Don't step toward him." It wasn't fear exactly. Just this deep animal-level discomfort, the kind you feel when you realize a shadow in your room has the wrong shape. I eased my car forward, planning to pass slowly and get a better look. The fog warped the light, so his features stayed indistinct until I was almost beside him. And even then, I couldn't make sense of him. His clothes looked normal enough, jeans, dark jacket, but there was this stillness to him, a stiffness that reminded me of someone trying too hard to pose like a person. When I finally passed him, I checked my mirror out of curiosity. That's when everything inside me went cold. He had turned. He was now facing my car. I hadn't seen him move. Not the slightest shift. 1 second he was staring into the mountains. The next he was staring directly at my taillights. He didn't step toward me. Didn't raise his hands. Didn't even tilt his head. Just stood there, locked onto my car with that blank, unreadable posture. I accelerated, trying to shake the feeling crawling across my skin. The road curved again, and for a moment the guardrail blocked my view of him. And that's when I heard it. A sharp, faint metallic tap. Just one. Like something had struck the guardrail behind me. Then another. And another. Slow, rhythmic taps, like someone dragging metal along the railing in a steady pattern. I glanced back in the mirror, but the fog swallowed everything behind me. There was no shape, no figure, no movement. Only the tapping, distant yet somehow echoing as if the metal was vibrating through the entire mountain. I told myself it was in my head. The fog. The silence. The isolation. I forced myself to focus on the road until the curve ended and the tapping faded behind me. But even as it disappeared, I realized my hands were shaking slightly on the wheel. I drove for another 20 minutes before the fog thinned enough for me to see more than a dozen feet ahead. My nerves settled a little, and I pulled into a lookout point to breathe and convince myself nothing strange had happened. The overlook was empty, just a picnic table and a map sign half-rotted by rain. The moment I stepped out, I heard it again. Tap. Not loud. Barely noticeable. But unmistakable. Tap. It was coming from the woods behind me, hidden by the trees and undergrowth. A metallic sound that didn't belong out there. I froze. The fog hadn't followed me this far, but the woods were dark enough that anything could have been in them. The sound came again, a long dragging scrape followed by a soft click, like something metal had caught on a rock. I tried shining my phone flashlight toward the noise, but the beam died after a few feet. It didn't cut through the darkness the way it should have. It felt swallowed. Tap. That one was closer. I backed toward my car, heart hammering. The air felt thick and cold, like stepping into a basement after years of disuse. I shut the door and locked it, gripping the wheel even though I wasn't driving yet. I told myself, just go. Just leave. But I was frozen, staring at the tree line. The tapping stopped. Silence settled over the overlook like a held breath. And for a moment, I thought maybe I'd imagined everything. Maybe the sound had been a loose piece of metal shifting in the wind or some old fencing out in the brush. Then my headlights flickered, just once. A soft, brief pulse. And in the reflection of the glass, I saw something move between the trees. Not a person. Not an animal. Just a pale vertical shape slipping behind a trunk. Too tall and too narrow to make sense. I turned the ignition so fast I nearly snapped the key. Gravel spat behind my tires as I sped away, the overlook shrinking in my rear view. The tapping didn't follow this time, but I kept checking the mirrors, expecting to see that figure back on the shoulder of the road, watching me again. For the rest of the drive, every time I slowed near a bend or a roadside barrier, I heard little echoes, tiny metallic pings, subtle but clear. Not constant. Not patterned. Just enough to keep me tense, like something was keeping pace with me, always staying just out of sight. When I finally reached the small town near my motel, I felt relief unlike anything I'd experienced before. Streetlights, buildings, other people. Everything familiar and normal. I parked under a lamp and just sat there for a minute, letting the tension melt out of my muscles. Before I got out, I checked my mirror one last time, even though I knew I shouldn't. And there he was. Not up close. Not standing behind my car, but far across the empty lot, near the line of trees bordering the highway. A silhouette, motionless, facing the direction of my parked car. His posture was exactly the same, arms at his sides, head tilted slightly upward, just watching me. I blinked, looked again, and the shape was gone. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe it was exhaustion. Or maybe he'd never been a man at all. Just something that liked to stand too still, listen too quietly, and follow anyone foolish enough to notice him. I don't hear tapping anymore. But every once in a while, when I'm alone at night, I get this strange feeling that someone's standing just beyond the edge of my vision. Silent, patient, facing me, and I don't dare look. I used to tell people the Blue Ridge was my reset button. Whenever life felt too loud or crowded, I'd get in my car and drive those quiet mountain roads until the world felt manageable again. But that was before that night. Before I learned there are some stretches of those ridges where the silence isn't peaceful at all. Just something waiting, holding its breath, listening for whoever wanders close enough. It was a little after midnight when I started the drive. I'd been visiting a friend a couple towns over, and I stayed later than I meant to. The weather had been clear earlier, but somewhere around mile marker 180 the fog started rolling in, soft at first, then thicker and heavier with every turn. By the time I hit the stretch near marker 212, it felt like the world had dissolved into white. My high beams did nothing but push the fog back in my face like a mirror. The lines on the road were barely visible, and the cliffside bend was coming up, the one with nothing but empty air on the right side. I slowed down to a crawl, leaning forward as if squinting would help me see through it. That's when I noticed the silhouette. At first it was just a darker patch in the fog, nothing more. But as the shape sharpened, I realized it was a person, a man, standing perfectly still near the guardrail. No movement, no shifting weight from foot to foot, just upright and rigid, facing the mountains like he was listening to something deep out in the valleys. I slowed almost to a stop. My stomach tightened, but there was no reason yet to be afraid. Maybe he'd broken down. Maybe he'd gotten lost. Maybe he'd been walking for help. But when my headlights finally lit his form, something settled wrong in me. It wasn't anything dramatic. No horrific features, no twisted limbs. It was his stillness. His absolute lack of reaction. He didn't turn his head, didn't raise a hand, didn't even flinch as my car crept toward him. It was like he hadn't heard me coming, even though my engine echoed off the guardrail. I rolled the window down a few inches. "Hey," I called out, voice shaky from the cold that had crept into my chest. "You all right? Need help?" "Nothing." I cleared my throat and tried again, louder this time. "Sir, everything okay?" Still nothing. He didn't even twitch. The fog swirled around him, thinning just enough for me to see his face, or what I could make of it. His skin was pale, not in a sick way but in a washed-out way, like someone who'd spent too long underground. His features didn't shift or react. His eyes, what little I could see of them, didn't blink, didn't squint against the headlights. They just stared forward, unfocused. The longer I looked at him, the more every instinct in my body screamed at me not to get out of the car. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was more like the quiet sound of something inside me whispering wrong, wrong, wrong. The same way you'd feel if you walked into a room and saw a chair balancing on one leg. Nothing dramatic, just fundamentally off. I edged the car forward, planning to pass him slowly. As I drew even with him, the fog bent around the beam of my headlights, stretching shadows across his body in ways that made him look too tall, then too thin, then perfectly normal again. My perception kept shifting, and I couldn't tell if it was the fog or something else. When I finally passed him, I let out a shaky breath. I checked my mirror, just to reassure myself he was still standing there harmlessly. But he wasn't facing the mountains anymore. He was facing me. I never saw him move. One moment his back was to me, the next he was staring directly at my car with the same blank, motionless posture. His head didn't tilt. His arms didn't lift. He just stood there almost like he was trying to remember what people were supposed to look like, and he needed to study me to get it right. I sped up, heart pounding. The guardrail curved, hiding him from sight. And then I heard it. Tap. A faint metallic click against the railing behind me. I tried to tell myself it was just the car settling, or a rock kicked up by the tire. But then it came again. Tap. Then a long, steady scrape, like metal dragging along the guardrail. My eyes darted to the rearview mirror, but the fog behind me was too thick. There was no person, no shape, just that sound, clear and rhythmically slow, like someone tapping a piece of metal in a deliberate pattern. I pressed the gas. Hard. It wasn't until 20 minutes later that the fog finally loosened. I pulled into a lookout point to breathe and remind myself I wasn't losing my mind. The overlook was empty and quiet. Just a picnic table, a half-rotted sign with a map, and the faint smell of wet leaves. I got out, letting the cool air settle my nerves. Then I heard it. Tap. Soft. So soft I almost missed it. But it came from the tree line behind me, not the guardrail. A metallic dot of sound that didn't belong anywhere near those woods. I spun, scanning the trees. Everything was dark. Too dark. My phone flashlight barely pushed a cone of light a few feet forward, swallowed almost immediately by the undergrowth. I heard another scrape, metal against stone, slow and hesitant, the way someone might drag a piece of iron across a concrete floor. I backed up until I reached the car door. My breath felt too loud in the silence. My fingers shook as I fumbled for the handle. The woods went quiet at once. Completely. Then my headlights flickered, just once, and in the reflection on the windshield I saw movement. A pale sliver of shape sliding between the trees. Not walking. Not running. Just slipping behind a trunk like a vertical streak of light. I dove into the car and locked the doors. The moment the locks clicked, the tapping started again, closer this time. Slow. Measured. Almost thoughtful. I turned the key with shaking hands. The engine roared to life, and gravel flew behind my tires as I tore out of the overlook. The tapping didn't follow, and the fog didn't return, but I didn't feel safe. Not with every curve echoing the faint metallic pings I kept hearing over the engine. Sometimes they sounded far away. Other times I'd swear they came from the woods right beside me, just beyond the guardrail. I didn't stop again. Not until I reached the little town near my motel. The streetlights and the faint hum of civilization felt like a shield. I parked under a lamp, sinking back against the seat. For the first time in an hour, I let myself breathe fully. Before getting out, I checked my rearview mirror. Just a quick look, just to make sure nothing was behind me. And I saw him. Far across the empty lot, near the line of trees. A single silhouette. Motionless. Facing my car with that same stiff posture, arms at his sides, head slightly tilted upward. He didn't move. Didn't step closer. Just stood there as if tracking me across the miles had been the easiest thing in the world. I blinked and he was gone. I'm not sure he was ever really there. Not sure if any part of that night makes sense in daylight. But sometimes, when the world is still and the house settles at night, I hear it again. Tap. Soft. Patient. Like someone standing just beyond the edge of the light, waiting for me to look his way. I don't think I ever will. I didn't see the woman at first. All I noticed was the way the drizzle softened the edges of everything. The trees, the asphalt, even the faded white arrow painted on the exit ramp. I'd taken the wrong turn after my GPS completely blanked out on me. No signal, no offline reroute, just a frozen blue dot and that dead gray screen. I figured I'd roll a few hundred feet and find a place to turn around. But the ramp spilled into a patch of crumbling pavement that shouldn't have been connected to a highway at all. There were no signs, no lights. Not even the reflective markers you normally see on back roads. Just black trees crowding in on both sides like they'd grown too close and swallowed whatever town used to be here. I eased the car around and that's when my headlights brushed across her. Standing in the middle of the road like she'd been there long before I arrived. The first thing that struck me was how still she was. Not bracing against the cold drizzle. Not adjusting her weight. Just standing, one arm half raised, palm forward, like she'd been trying to flag someone down for a long time. Her clothes looked wrong too. Not dirty, not torn, just old. Denim jacket, faded pattern dress, the sort of outfit you'd see in a family photo from the late 90s. But she didn't look weathered or aged. Just misplaced. Like she'd walked straight out of a memory. Something inside me said to keep driving. I don't know why. She looked human, normal, no obvious injury, nothing threatening. But everything in me pulled tight the longer I stared. I cracked the window an inch, letting in the smell of wet pine and the faint hiss of the drizzle hitting my hood. "Ma'am, are you all right?" I called out, trying to sound calm. She didn't blink. She didn't look at me. She just tilted her head. Slowly, like she was listening for something behind her. That's when I heard the footsteps. They came from the tree lane, heavy and deliberate. The sound of weight shifting through wet leaves and soft forest floor. Not running. Not stumbling. Searching. I felt the hair rise on the back of my neck because the steps weren't random or wandering. They moved with direction, with patience, like whoever was out there knew exactly where they were going, and it led straight to the road. I turned the headlights slightly, hoping to catch a glimpse of a person, maybe a lost hiker or someone from a nearby house, but the trees remained a wall of darkness. Only the sound reached us. The woman lowered her hand and took one step toward my car. A small step, but enough to jolt something in me. I didn't slam the brakes or screech backward. I just eased a few inches away without thinking. And that tiny movement made her freeze mid-stride. She didn't look surprised. She didn't get angry. She just stopped, like she'd remembered something important at the exact moment I moved. She slowly turned her body toward the tree lane. The footsteps kept going for another few seconds, then paused as if whoever was making them had noticed her attention shift. I leaned toward the open window to hear better, but the drizzle almost drowned it out. The forest felt thicker suddenly, heavier, like sound didn't behave normally there. She leaned forward slightly, whispering something. So soft I couldn't make out even the cadence. But whatever she said, the effect was immediate. The footsteps stopped. I didn't mean to hold my breath, but I did. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel, and a thought pressed into my mind so strongly it felt like someone else put it there. You shouldn't be here. Not on this road. Not with her. Not with whatever else is listening. I put the car in reverse, keeping my eyes on her. I'm going to go get help, I said, though I'm not sure why I even bothered. She still hadn't looked at me. As I rolled back toward the ramp, she didn't follow. She didn't move. She didn't even acknowledge I'd spoken. She only kept facing the woods, body angled like she was bracing herself for something I couldn't see. I kept expecting the figure in the trees to reveal itself, but nothing came out. No animal. No person. Only the memory of steps still echoing in my head. I checked my mirrors as I straightened out onto the ramp. Empty road behind me. I looked back again. Still empty. She was gone, like she'd stepped off the pavement and melted into the woods without a single sound. The drizzle hadn't stopped, and the road was wet enough to show footprints, but the asphalt behind me held nothing. No mark of her presence, no trail leading away. When I reached the top of the exit ramp, my GPS flickered back to life so suddenly the screen nearly blinded me in the dark. The map redrew itself, the road reappeared, and the voice guidance resumed as if nothing had happened. But the strangest thing was the map itself. It showed a continuous stretch of highway with no exits between mile markers 211 and 223. The space where the ramp should have been, where I had just been, was marked as uninterrupted terrain. Green. Forest. No roads. I drove until the drizzle dried off my windshield, until the trees thinned and the highway widened again. But even then, I kept checking the rearview mirror like I expected to see her standing on the shoulder or hear those slow, heavy footsteps catching up. The whole time, the GPS kept a perfect signal. No glitches. No dropouts. Nothing to acknowledge what I'd just driven through. A week later, I looked up the area on satellite view out of curiosity. I zoomed in on the spot where exit 12A should have been, slowly, layer by layer. At first all I saw was uninterrupted forest. Then, as I zoomed closer, I noticed a faint outline, like the impression of an old road that had been overgrown decades ago. A cracked piece of pavement curved into the woods, leading nowhere. And at the center of the clearing, half obscured by shadow, something human-shaped stood on the image. Still. Alone. Facing the trees. The image disappeared the next day. And I still don't take unfamiliar exits after dark. I'd been driving for hours that night. One of those long, empty Appalachian stretches where the radio fades into static and the mountains press in on both sides like they're trying to listen. It was close to 2 a.m. when the road narrowed into that familiar broken ribbon of pavement running between two coal towns I couldn't remember the names of. I'd taken the route before, but it always felt different at night, like the land shifted around when the sun went down. Even the air smelled different. Coal dust, wet leaves, old wood. The kind of smell that makes you realize how alone you really are. I didn't notice the headlights right away. They appeared so gradually I thought they were far in the distance. Just a pair of pale pinpricks cutting through a haze of fog. But within 30 seconds, they were glued to my bumper. So close the light swallowed my rearview mirror. I squinted, trying to adjust, but the glare was blinding. I tapped my brakes to signal them to back off. They didn't. I sped up. They matched me. I changed lanes. They followed like a shadow. My heart hadn't jumped yet. I'd had my share of impatient drivers on mountain roads, but something felt wrong. The consistency of the movement. The way the truck held just the right distance no matter what speed I hit. No fishtailing, no weaving, no hesitation. Just steady, perfect control. I told myself it was some coal worker familiar with these roads, probably annoyed I was slowing him down. But the unease kept building in the back of my throat like pressure before a storm. The road curved, and for the first time I caught a real glimpse of the vehicle. It was an old Chevy pickup, the kind you only ever see in towns where half the houses have collapsed porches and rusted appliances in the yard. Mud-caked plates, cracked headlights, a rattling chrome grille that looked one pothole away from falling off. But none of that bothered me. What chilled me was the cab. Even with its lights blasting full force into my mirror, I couldn't make out a silhouette behind the wheel. No head shape. No movement. Not even the hint of a hand braced against the glass. It was just dark. Too dark. Like the inside absorbed the light instead of reflecting it. I tried to convince myself it was the angle. Maybe the driver sat low, or the windshield was tinted. But the more I stared, the more I realized the beams from my own headlights weren't bouncing off the rear window the way they should have. They weren't bouncing off anything. It looked like there was nothing inside. I kept driving because I didn't know what else to do. The road tightened into a sharp hairpin curve that wrapped around a cliffside, and a flash of lightning cracked across the sky at the perfect moment. For one split second, the whole mountainside lit up like a photograph taken with an old flashbulb. And the truck's cab was empty. Not just dark. Empty. No shadows. No outline. No motion. Just 2 seats and nothing in them. I didn't have time to process it. The truck stayed right behind me, smoothing into the curve without adjusting speed, hugging the yellow line with unnatural precision. I slammed the gas pedal down and felt my engine strain as the speedometer climbed. The truck matched me effortlessly, its headlights unwavering. No bounce, no flicker, no sign of suspension at all. I kept thinking about how things move on Appalachian backroads. Anyone who's driven them knows your headlights jitter from potholes, your tires skid on loose gravel, your cab shakes when you hit uneven asphalt. But this thing moved like it wasn't touching the road at all. My palms were sweating by then. I wiped them on my jeans and tried to steady my breathing. I thought about trying to call someone, but I had no cell service, and even if I did, what would I say? A driverless truck is tailgating me through the mountains. I couldn't even convince myself of what I was seeing. Another curve approached, wide, sloping downward, bordered by a steep drop into a black stretch of forest. The perfect place for a reckless driver to make a mistake. But not this truck. It glided through the turn without losing speed, without shifting weight, as if the steering wheel weren't even necessary. I kept pushing my engine harder than I should have, the RPMs rattling, the frame shaking, but the truck never broke form. When the tunnel finally appeared in the distance, I nearly cried from relief. It was the only lit stretch of road for miles, just a narrow concrete passage carved straight through the mountain. I aimed straight for it, praying the truck would lose interest or at least struggle with the shift in lighting. I shot into the tunnel, the fluorescent lights washing the interior of my car in pale yellow. The sound of my tires echoed off the walls. The truck didn't follow. Its headlights vanished the instant my car crossed the threshold. No fade out. No dimming in the rear view. They were there one moment and gone the next, like someone flipped a switch. I slowed to a crawl inside the tunnel, the sound of my engine bouncing back at me in a hollow metallic rhythm. My pulse was throbbing in my ears. When I reached the far end, the road behind me stayed dark. No headlights. No engine roar. No silhouette. Nothing but the empty stretch I'd just come through. I waited longer than I should have, long enough for the lights to flicker overhead and the sound of dripping water to get under my skin. When I finally pulled out, I kept glancing back every few seconds, expecting to see the glare reappear around the curve. It didn't. But something else did. About 10 minutes later, as the terrain flattened and the fog thinned, I noticed a pair of headlights way behind me. Tiny at first, just barely visible. I told myself it was a coincidence. Another driver. A real one. But the longer I watched, the more I recognized the rhythm. The steadiness. The way the lights never dipped, never drifted left or right. I pushed past 70 again, and the headlights remained the same size in the mirror. Never falling away, never catching up. Just keeping a perfect, unnatural distance. Eventually I hit a more populated area, and the lights disappeared behind a line of cars merging on. I made it home without incident, parked, and sat in the driveway for a long time, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. The night felt too quiet, like the world was holding its breath. A week later, on the same stretch of road but during the daytime, I pulled over and climbed a small embankment to look down the line of pavement. I don't know what I expected. Tracks, skid marks, maybe even the truck abandoned somewhere. But everything was normal. Empty. Silent. Just forest and asphalt. Except for one thing. Near the tunnel entrance, far enough that someone driving past wouldn't see it, the guardrail was bent inward. A single dent. Fresh. Almost like something had rammed into it at high speed. But there were no tire marks leading to it. No debris. Nothing to show how it happened. Some nights when I'm driving alone and the road stretches out ahead of me in that long dark ribbon, I still see headlights in the mirror that feel a little too steady, a little too precise. I tell myself it's just another driver, just another car, but I keep my speed unpredictable, slowing down at random, speeding up again, because I've learned something from that night. Whatever followed me wasn't reacting. It was matching. And sometimes, when you're deep in the mountains, that's worse than being chased. I was running on fumes long before I found that valley. I'd been driving through the back roads of southern Appalachia after taking a wrong turn outside a half-forgotten coal town, and every mile felt like the world was getting emptier. My GPS had died an hour earlier, both my phone and the car system losing signal at the same time. The radio was nothing but static. Even the air felt strange, thick, unmoving, as if the mountains were holding their breath. My tank hit the last bar, and I remember whispering to myself, "Just give me one station. Anything." The road dipped into a narrow valley then, the headlights carving a path through a tunnel of black trees. And out of nowhere, a flickering neon sign blinked on in the distance. Gas, open. Everything about it felt wrong immediately. The station wasn't on the map. It wasn't on any of the road logs I'd checked. It sat at the base of the valley like someone had dropped it there decades ago and then forgotten it. One pump. One small booth. No cars. No lights except the failing sign. The forest pressed up behind it like a solid wall. Dark, rooted too close, as if the trees had grown forward slowly over the years and now stood only feet from the building, holding it in place. But my tank was nearly empty. Fear had to take a back seat. I rolled up to the pump and stepped out. The air was cold enough to sting, but still, no breeze. My jacket didn't flutter. The pump flag didn't sway. Even the trees didn't shift. The only thing moving was the neon sign, flickering like it was struggling to stay alive. I looked toward the booth and saw him, an elderly man sitting behind the glass, completely still. His shoulders were hunched, his face angled downward, hands resting on the counter as if frozen mid-motion. I tapped on the glass. The sound didn't travel. It was the strangest sensation. I felt the knock in my knuckles, but I didn't hear anything. Not even the dull thud of skin on glass. I tapped harder. Nothing. The booth window was coated in a thick layer of dust, but the dust didn't shift from the impact. It was as if the booth wasn't part of the same world I was standing in. I circled to the side, peering through a clearer spot. The man didn't move. Didn't blink. I almost turned around and left right then, but my fuel gauge was dipping into the last mile. Leaving meant breaking down somewhere deeper in the woods, and that felt like a worse choice. So I pumped the gas, trying not to stare at the tree line. Something about the woods behind the station made my skin crawl. I didn't see movement, no deer, no branches swaying, but I felt watched. The whole forest looked too dense, too close. As if the valley had swallowed the sound before it reached me. When I went back to pay, the booth light glowed faintly, and the old man was standing now. Not facing me. Not reacting. Just upright behind the counter in the exact same posture. His hands placed exactly where they'd been when he was sitting. His head was tilted slightly upward this time, almost as if he was listening for something above us. I froze mid-step. My fingers twitched around the cash in my hand. It made no sense, no shuffling sound, no creak of a chair, no human movement at all. He simply existed in a different state, as if someone had changed the frame of a film reel while I wasn't looking. I slid the cash through the metal tray at the bottom of the window. The man's lips parted. Not wide. Just enough that I expected a word. Maybe a thank you, maybe a price, maybe something to acknowledge the exchange. But no voice came out. Instead, from the woods, I heard a faint rustling. Not leaves blowing. Not something small. This was deeper, heavier. The sound of something shifting weight between trees, careful and slow. The kind of movement you only hear when an animal, something large, is trying not to be heard. The man's mouth opened a fraction more. The rustling grew louder. I backed away from the booth without meaning to. My instincts weren't subtle. They were screaming. Get in the car. Go. Leave now. I fumbled with the door handle, glancing toward the woods. I didn't see anything, but the darkness between the trunks felt thick, almost layered, like there were shapes behind shapes behind shapes. The man's eyes finally lifted from wherever they had been focused. They didn't meet mine. They looked over my shoulder toward the forest. The noise stopped instantly. I don't know why, but that silence terrified me more than anything else that night. I got into the car so fast I nearly slammed the door on my jacket. Gravel spat from under my tires as I pulled away. The rearview mirror showed only the booth, the man's unmoving silhouette behind the glass, and that wall of trees standing too still behind him. The neon sign flickered once, twice, then cut out completely. 10 minutes later, I looked back again. There were no lights. No sign. Not even the faint glow of the booth. Just an empty valley behind me, swallowed in darkness. By the next morning, I'd convinced myself it was some sort of abandoned station that someone had illegally hooked up to a generator. Maybe I'd hallucinated some of it from exhaustion. Maybe the woods had been alive with normal wildlife I wasn't used to hearing. I drove back in daylight to reassure myself. But when I reached the valley, there was nothing there. No station. No pump. No booth. Only a rotted pile of collapsed boards overtaken by vines so thick they looked like they'd been growing for decades. The forest behind it had swallowed the clearing entirely. I stepped out and walked around trying to make sense of it. The boards were soft with decay. Mushrooms had grown through them. There was no dust-coated glass. No counter. No booth foundation. Nothing remotely new. The woods were silent again, but in that living, breathing way forests get when you're truly alone. Before I left, I found one thing that made my stomach twist. Barely visible under the leaves near where the pump should have been, I spotted a dented metal fuel cap. Old. Rusted. Half-buried. But the shape was unmistakable. It matched the pump I'd touched the night before. I stood there longer than I should have, listening for that rustling sound from the trees. Listening to see if the woods remembered me. I didn't hear anything. But that didn't make me feel better. Silence like that isn't peace. It's waiting. I don't let my tank get low anymore. Not on back roads. Not near valleys. Not anywhere the maps start leaving blank spaces between towns. Because sometimes when I'm tired and the road dips unexpectedly, I still catch myself scanning the distance for a flickering sign. One that shouldn't be there, one that hasn't been there for decades. And some nights, I swear I see it. I still don't know why I slowed down on that bridge. Maybe it was the fog settling low across the rails, or the way the moonlight caught the rusted grates beneath my tires. Maybe it was just the late hour and the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that makes you second-guess every shape in the dark. But at nearly 3 in the morning, alone on an iron span older than my grandparents, something made me ease off the gas. The first whisper came so faintly I thought it was the wind slipping through the beams, but the sound didn't move like wind. It rose upward in thin strands, weaving through the metal grates as if the bridge itself was breathing. I rolled down the window to listen, and an icy sheet of air flooded the car, sharp enough to sting my sinuses. It smelled wrong, like cold metal soaked in river rot, the kind of smell you only find under something that hasn't been lifted in decades. The whispers didn't fade with the wind. They thickened. They weren't words, but there was a rhythm to them, a cadence too deliberate to be water. It was like a cluster of voices murmuring in unison, just low enough that my mind tried to fill in the blanks and failed. I leaned out the window, expecting to see reflections rippling off the water below, but the surface was dead black, the kind of black that swallows light instead of bouncing it back. The moon should have lit at least a sliver of it, but the river looked like it drank the glow instead. I turned on my high beams to try to cut through the darkness, but the shadows under the bridge only seemed to thicken, gathering tightly around the supporting beams like clusters of people huddling in the cold. For a moment the whispers rose sharply, like they were reacting to the change in light. It almost sounded like a warning. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that exhaustion was playing tricks on me, but then the car shuddered so violently I nearly hit my head on the ceiling. Something had scraped beneath me. Long, dragging, deliberate. Not the quick grind of debris, not a branch or rock tossed by current. This scrape had weight behind it. Pressure. Like fingers pulling along the underside. I froze, foot hovering above the gas. The whispering swelled until it pressed against the windows like a living thing, surrounding the car, threading through the vents, vibrating through the steering wheel. It was no longer a distant murmur. It was close enough that I could feel the breath of it on my hands. I panicked and slammed the accelerator. My engine roared, but the car lurched forward only a foot or two before dragging to a stop again, as if something heavy clung to the undercarriage. The frame groaned with the strain. Metal popped. The steering wheel trembled violently beneath my grip. I kept my foot pinned, fighting against the resistance until suddenly, violently, it released. The car shot forward, nearly fishtailing off the bridge entirely. I didn't touch the brakes, not even when I cleared the river and the trees closed back in around me. My heartbeat felt like it was inside my throat, pounding against my windpipe. Even after the bridge disappeared behind me, the cold lingered in the car, clinging to the upholstery, sticking to my clothes like mist. I didn't sleep when I got home. I didn't even shut off the outside light. I just sat in the living room with my keys still in my hand, waiting for the shaking in my legs to stop. It didn't. Not for hours. When daylight finally hit, I forced myself outside to inspect the car. I expected to find scratches, dents, something to explain what had happened. Instead, I found nothing but a thin sheen of moisture under the frame. Not dew. Dew warms with the morning sun. This water was cold, unnaturally cold, like melt from an underground glacier. It steamed faintly in the warm air. I wiped my fingers along the undercarriage and jerked my hand back the second the chill bit into my skin. It didn't feel like river water. It felt like something colder than that, something that had no business being on a car that hadn't touched a drop of water all night. I left the house again around noon, telling myself it had all been in my head, that the whispers were water currents catching strange angles under rusted beams, that the scraping was a loose panel or a chunk of debris caught in the grates. But I didn't take that bridge. I drove the long way around, over an hour out of my way, through roads half washed out by spring rain and clogged with down branches. I didn't care. I wasn't going back there. Not after what I heard, what I felt. Over the next week, I noticed small things changing. Sounds that didn't match anything outside. Soft tapping against my bedroom window even on windless nights. A low hum under the floorboards that ceased the moment I tried to record it. Reflections in puddles that didn't match my movements. But the whispers were the worst. At first I caught only fragments, faint shivering currents of sound drifting in through cracks in the door, the shower drain, the seams of the windows. Always at night. Always low. Never distinct enough to understand. I kept telling myself it was leftover fear. That I was imagining it. That I needed sleep. But exhaustion didn't explain the nights I woke gasping because the entire room felt colder than the rest of the house. The cold came exactly the way it had on the bridge. Sudden, metallic, and silent. Some nights I could swear I heard something shifting beneath the floorboards. Not crawling. Not running. Dragging. Slow, deliberate dragging. Like the sound under my car. Like something testing the underside of the house instead of the underside of a vehicle. The dream started after that. Faces in the river, pressed against the underside of the water like they were trapped in glass. Eyes wide. Mouths open in soundless screams. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. Stretching back through murky depths. Sometimes I'd jolt awake and swear I heard the same whispering patterns from the bridge drifting up from beneath my bed, pulsing faintly through the springs. I started avoiding sleep entirely. Coffee, cold showers, anything to keep myself awake. But exhaustion catches you eventually. It always does. One night I fell asleep on the couch, lights still on, shoes still on my feet. I woke to the distinct feeling of weight on the cushions near my legs. Not enough to pin me, but enough to know something was sitting there. Breathing softly. Wetly. The air turned so cold my breath fogged. I didn't open my eyes. I couldn't. I just lay there, frozen, praying the cold would pass. Eventually it did. Slowly. As if whatever was near me drifted away, slipping off the couch without sound. I moved out of that house within the week. I didn't bother packing half my things. I just left. And I told myself I'd stay away from that entire part of the county, that I'd never cross that bridge again. But every now and then, when I'm driving at night, especially near rivers or low fog, I hear them again. Not loud, not enough to be certain, but enough that I grip the wheel a little tighter and keep my speed steady. A faint whisper threading up through the floorboard. A soft dragging beneath the car that lasts only a heartbeat. Long enough to remind me of that night. Long enough to make me wonder if the thing I heard under the bridge didn't stay in the water. If maybe it followed the warmth. Followed the engine. Followed me. I don't take that bridge anymore. But sometimes, especially around 3 in the morning, I get the feeling the voices don't need me to. They already know where to find me.